Hello and welcome to another UK Column Live. Today's date is the 25th of July, and after last week's kerfuffle, I'm going to keep the weather really simple. It's fine. Okay, we're having a few problems with our phone lines. Mike, what's going on with the gerbils downstairs?
They're broken.
They're broken?
Yep.
That's
so I'm not going to have the time to look at it until after the weekend, so
right.
No phones today or tomorrow, unfortunately. Sorry,
right.
guys.
So apologies for that. Mike, where are we going to first?
We're starting off with GDP because, of course, David Cameron has been crowing somewhat about the fact that the Office for National Statistics says the economy grew by 0.6%. Well, that's really exciting, isn't it? We're still we're still more than 3% below where the economy was before the financial crash. But of course, this means that everything's on the mend. Now, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. So aside, of course, from today, lots of people using it for party political capital, sending Ed Ball smug messages implying that Labour would never have achieved such great results. We did mention yesterday, of course, that it was absolutely ridiculous to use GDP as a measure of economic reality. And in fact, this opinion piece, which was published at 7 o'clock last night in the Financial Times, seems to agree. And that's pretty good, I think. So, you know, what is the reality? Of course, this whole business in the press at the moment is pushing forward the idea psychologically to people. And I mean, the BBC, the propaganda in the BBC over these GDP figures is spectacular. And they're pushing forward this idea that everything's sorted out and everything's back to normal. And of course, it isn't. Even some of the BBC commentary has been suggesting that this is growth, and they're suggesting that it's not any type of growth that we've ever seen before, because of course it's just a figure. It's not economic reality. People's lives are being destroyed in the meantime.
Do you think this is a sort of an attempt to get people spending more and out and about because they feel that they should be spending because, oh, the economy must be fine, therefore my neighbours must be fine, and I've got to spend more?
Look, everybody knows that there's another major financial crash coming, and in another 6 months or a year or 2 years or whenever that happens, if the politicians come out again and say, oh, well, nobody saw it coming, well, lots and lots of people are seeing it coming. It's a fact that nothing has changed from 2007. We're starting to pump up the bubbles again, and nothing is going to change. But, you know, in the meantime, aside from the fact that people's take-home living standards are falling and their salaries are falling, we are starting to see some reality, some economic reality, the effects of austerity on people's lives. So here we have this report from Local Government Chronicle talking about mortality rates. And in fact, the reality here is that 600 more people died every week this year than the weekly average for the past 5 years. And in fact, mortalities in this country have been rising both last year and the whole of last year and so far this year. Now, is this a result of NHS death programmes? Or is it the result of declining healthcare as a result of austerity? Or is it the effect of both of those things? I think it's probably both of those things. And of course, other stark economic reality is that our infrastructure continues to creak under the weight of no investment. So we've got this Mail article here talking about standing room only. 1 in 4 passengers forced to stand on Britain's busiest trains, with some carriages 65% over capacity. There's got to be, in light of what's happened in Spain yesterday with this crash, there's got to be a safety issue aside from the economic reality. If one of these trains comes off the rails with this number of people standing in the aisles, there's going to be severe casualties. The other point that I really wanted to make about this, which I think is a critical point in the present circumstances, of course, is the direct result of a complete lack of investment in the railway infrastructure. But of course, it's also the effect, because railways was one of the early privatisations, it also describes or demonstrates absolutely what happens when you privatise a public sector. Now, I'm not saying British Rail was any good, you understand, but we were promised that the private sector could do it better. And the private sector is utterly failing to do it better. They're putting profit way above service. They're not investing in the railways in any way. And we're seeing absolutely that privatised services are simply a cash cow sucking off the taxpayer.
Sure. Some people would say that British Rail actually was made to be inefficient and in order to bring through privatisation and make it a much easier sort of transition from the public to the private, because we can say, hey, look, British Rail, look at how useless it is and inefficient it is.
I don't think that just applies to British Rail. I think that applies to British Leyland and a whole bunch of other manufacturing companies. So any of these sort of British, what were perceived as British organisations, were systematically destroyed. The managers went in and the top management went in and introduced a culture which was guaranteed. Britain now crows about how great a car manufacturing industry we have now, but these are all companies that have come in from outside, and the implication is that Britain couldn't manage these things. That was done to Britain. It was another operation that was done to Britain. So of course, another area of privatisation is the power and energy sector. And Scottish Power here is warning that government efficiency schemes could push energy prices up further, and they're saying that this is the rising burden of taxes and levies on energy companies. They're saying that a 137% rise in the cost of implementing government efficiency schemes is going to mean that they just have to put the prices up. So what date was that? That was today. That was published early this morning, but only just over a month ago. Well, Uswitch published that. Scottish Power doubles profits amidst energy price rises. So this is again highlights the reality, the economic reality of what happens when you privatise what should be a national asset. It becomes a cash cow. People living off these companies living off the taxpayer and providing no service in return.
And of course, many of these companies, energy companies especially, they're using our resources to profit from us. I just think that in itself is quite abominable in a way. It should be that the state, on behalf of the people, does actually use the resources for the people.
Absolutely agree. Okay, and in this day of great economic news, then we've got banks threatening to increase charges for using credit and debit cards after the European Union has decided to crack down on the fees that are charged to retailers by banks for processing those cards. So basically the banks, just like the energy companies, are taking the attitude, well, we pretty much need to be guaranteed some level of profit here. And so if we're not allowed to suck the profit out of the retailer, we'll just suck the profit out of the customer, or out of our direct customers. And you find this one as well, because they're also talking about what? £500 a year for running a bank account.
Well, this is at the moment. This is what the highest retail bank is charging at the moment, which is £500 a year. This is really a debate which has come back. If you remember, this was happening a few months back, where banks were talking about charging people for their current accounts. I think typically, or what one industry source said, that a typical £12 a month bank account actually only costs £3 to deliver. Now, I'm not amazing at maths, but I think that's about a 400% markup. So that's a pretty big markup, and to me, that really is a false economy. I mean, for what value are you getting out of that £12? In compared to some cost that the bank has incurred, which is really what they say that they need to introduce the charges for, is because it's costing them to provide the current account. Well, quite clearly it's not costing them that much. But I think it's just really, it's a similar sort of way of, as a mafia would say, if you pay us this little bit of money, we won't have to extort you in some other place, which is really what the main argument for charging people for their current account is that, well, if the banks were guaranteed this price at the end of the month, then they wouldn't have to squeeze money out of us in other areas. For me, it's just a complete con.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we've got to remind ourselves that, of course, the banks aren't really in a position to make any profits at the moment, because they've got such huge liabilities sitting on their books. What they are doing is stealing money from people in order to pay bonuses. So they're taking that money out of the bank as quickly as they possibly can, in case something nasty happens to the bank in the not too distant future. I
think at the recent AGM for Nationwide, I think the top bankers got paid 1.7 million bonuses. So that's a pretty big bonus, bigger than my bonus.
Well, I thought this was an incredible story.
It really is probably the most incredible story I've read, certainly in a long time. And this is that the Church of England wants to compete with Wonga And Wonga, of course, are the payday loans company that charges extortionate amounts of interest.
Well, just before we go on, a little fact about Wonga that appeared on Twitter today, and that is the debt management organisation Step Change has said that the average payday loan now exceeds the average monthly income. So they're saying that the average payday loan is now £1,657.
Wow.
Now, of course, that demonstrates absolutely that there is a need to offer an alternative to these payday loan companies. But is this it?
Is this it? I mean, for me, this is such a big topic. The reason why it's so big is because even though the bank is, the Church of England has set up a credit union still charges interest. Now, interest is usury, which is actually, is actually spoken against in the Bible. The Bible is completely against usury. So, what is a gentleman who is the head of, or the head bishop of the church? Why has he decided that creating a credit union is the way to go? And of course, if we look at his past, he has a very interesting past. The gentleman comes from the oil industry, but he's also a financier. He's basically from the banking sort of world. And he still sits on the Parliamentary Commission for the Banking Standards. I mean, this guy is,
he's a banker.
He's a banker. People really do need to look into his history, to see really where this man is coming from. He's basically, in my opinion, is dismantling what is British culture, which is Christianity. I'm not a Christian, so I'm not here to poo-poo just because he, of his own personal interests, but this is the culture of the country, and he has no, well, in my mind, he has no right to be doing what he's doing. And it's interesting that the man's only been put into post for 6 months, and already we're seeing a big support for gay marriages, and we're seeing what appears to be usury in the church.
Yeah.
The BBC correspondent said that this is a religious affairs correspondent, Robert Piggott, said the Archbishop's plan was to go to some of the 500 independent loans companies and say to them, we will help you by letting you have access to our buildings and expertise. So anyone who's really been following what's going on in the world at the moment surely must put the pieces together and realise the people that do the advising are the people that really do the leading. I mean, that's essentially what advice really is.
Well, that statement implies that he's not actually intending to go into competition with Wonga, but is perhaps wanting to facilitate their...
Or perhaps swallow up certain companies, because again, that same correspondent said the church would not run the companies but would help them, allow them to work on its premises, but that it was quite possible that in the future people could go to the church when they needed to borrow money.
Wow.
Well,
there is the Anglican Mutual Credit Union. This is the proposal. That's their website. If you search for AMCU or Anglican Mutual Credit Union on whichever search engine you choose to use, then perhaps you'll find it pretty quickly. Okay, well, in other economic news then, a bit of potentially good news perhaps. The city of Houston in the United States has decided that they are going to sue the big banks that were involved in the LIBOR scandal. And to be honest, I think that maybe some of the banks need a bit more of this kind of thing. So they're suing 16 international financial services giants, as they're being called, and this is all to do with LIBOR. I mean, in fact, if the regulatory authorities aren't going to act in these situations, then as we talk about in other areas, then perhaps private prosecutions, in this case a lawsuit, is the best way to we've got to act ourselves. In other words, so damages to the city of Houston from the LIBOR thing could be substantial, said the lawyers involved. Well, of course, they're going to be going for the most, but anyway, good piece of news there. Okay, lobbyists.
Okay, so basically it's revealed that there's a shadow lobbying group which is waging a propaganda war to keep Britain in Europe. And this is basically a group of businessmen which is basically fighting behind the scenes to ensure that Britain doesn't really make much of an attempt to get out of the EU. Apparently they are appalled by the prospect of a vote to withdraw, and they have informed Business for New Europe to fight a public and private campaign to keep Britain in the Union. These people are very, very wealthy, very powerful. They have millions of pounds behind them, and really, in a sense, I think that they're guarding their own personal private interests. If you're going to ask me, to comment on personally, and I think that really lobbying groups essentially it's a form of bribery. And really what they're doing is they're fighting because British people, as have the rest of Europeans, have voiced the fact that they don't trust the EU and they don't feel that the EU serves them correctly.
So who is actually being named in this? I mean, we had
well, Roland Rudd basically is the arch networker, which I believe we have a picture of him standing next to Lord, Mandelson. And basically he runs a successful city PR company which is called Finsbury. And this is the gentleman on the right as we're looking at it. He is basically the driving force behind the lobby group. And interestingly, he was a confidant of Tony Blair and Lord Mandelson, so he moves and shakes with some very lovely, polite people. And he is and David Miliband as well, who of course is Labour's last Foreign Secretary.
Yes.
Only this week, statistics showed that Britain attracted more investment from overseas than any other EU country last year, and the number of foreign investment projects rose by 11% to 1,559, according to a report by UK Trade and Investment. So again, the data itself is not actually showing that what Mandelson and Rudd want is actually better for the people, because our nation is happily flourishing away from Europe, or is certainly leading away from Europe in its sort of international trade. If we could skip to the next slide, which I think is really interesting, it says that only 30% of citizens have trust in the EU. So really, I think this is what sparked this lobbying movement, is because really the people are starting to speak out and saying that they don't want to be part of this conglomerate. I thought it was a really interesting title, only 30% of citizens. So I checked out, did a little quick search on the exact definition of citizens, and it's interesting that it's a native or naturalised person who owes allegiance to a government and is entitled to protection from it. So interesting that we're already stating that we owe allegiance to Europe. So out of the 32,000 people that were polled, 31% of the people throughout Europe said that they trusted Europe, and 60% said they didn't trust Europe. And in the UK, that was slightly more towards our benefit, which is 20% trust the EU, whereas 68% of British people don't actually trust the EU. And of course, the biggest countries, as you would expect, that don't trust the EU are Greece, Spain, and Cyprus.
Well, that's hardly a surprise.
It's
really.
hardly a surprise given recent times, indeed.
Okay, police forced to axe road cameras.
Yes, this is a bit of good news, I suppose, in some sense. Is that basically what's happened is that a town has basically said that the cameras that are used to check license plates and so forth have been spying on them, or have been sort of crouching over their privacy. Basically what happens is with these cameras, obviously your details of your movements are collected, but these cameras were set up in a position outside the town, so it was monitoring people's movements in and out. A watchdog ruled basically that the blanket use of these cameras was excessive and unlawful, because it breached the Data Protection Act, simply because it was literally monitoring people throughout the day of where they went and how they went about their business. And Hertfordshire Constabulary has been given 90 days to reduce its use of the cameras. So that I think, in from the outside looking, at face value of the article, is a really good thing. And this is the first time a police force has ever been ordered to decrease the level of automatic number plate recognition cameras, which I think is a good thing. However, I'm a little bit kind of sceptical. I think probably because I work in this office on a daily basis. But I think that this isn't a formal ruling, right? This hasn't come from a court. This has just come from an organisation that calls itself a watchdog, right? So there's no policy going to come out of this. There's no legislation going to come from this. So I wonder, is this appeasing people?
Is this just a propaganda piece?
Is it a propaganda piece? So because as the piece points out, no changes are going to be made. The constabulary is only going to review its use of the cameras. It's not going to remove them. It's hailed as a victory, but it's not really a victory. So I wonder, is this just appeasing people's unrest about cameras, so that we go, oh yeah, there's a lobby group out there fighting for this, so I can go back to my normal life and I don't have to worry about doing it myself. So I'd say that, okay, well, why not apply a bit more pressure? Apply some pressure on your local constabulary or your local MP, and see if we can get some of these cameras removed, because I don't see any evidence to suggest that it actually makes us safer. I just see it as another step towards Big Brother watching us ever more closely.
Well,
personally.
Okay.
So this is a pretty big topic. It's a topic I've spoken about a lot. And again, I would say that what people do in the privacy of their own home and what choices they make personally is completely up to them. However, having said that, I don't want the person who is allegedly chairing the UK corporation to say that he wants to export gay marriage around the world, and that he speaks of a personal pride at the party celebrations in Downing Street. Basically, the article says that he boasted that Britain is now the best place to be gay, lesbian or transgender. Obviously, heterosexual wasn't mentioned in there. Also suggested that his ministers should now fan out across the globe to spread gay marriage around the world. I mean, again, is this man making world policy now? I just think that this is a little bit bad taste, no offence intended. He, quote, "I'm personally proud of this," he said. "I think it's a really good step. I've told the Bill team I'm now going to reassign them because, of course, all over the world people would have been watching this, and we've set something of an example of how to pass good legislation in good time." I mean, really, do we need to legislate on people's sexual preference? I mean, it just seems a little bit kind of, again, in bad taste. Many people are going to want to copy this. I talk about how we've got to export more, so I'm going to export the Bill team. Well, I would suggest, actually, Cameron, that why don't you actually work on real exports and real value and real economy so that we can actually get out of the tight spot that we find ourselves in. I wonder how much GDP is Cameron actually expecting to increase by exporting gay marriage? I mean, it's just for me, it's just a really ridiculous piece, and I just feel that we shouldn't be focusing on this. Well, again, what people do in the privacy of their own home is completely up to them. What Cameron should be focusing on is real exports and real economy.
I agree. I think that this is a diversion in many ways. I also think that I'm interested to know why Cameron feels this needs to be a global policy. There are much bigger issues in the global context. There are a third of the world hungry. Yeah. There's a third of the world that has no opportunity for any kind of economic or standard of living at all. And I don't think that people that are dying of starvation in some African countries particularly need to be concerned about gay marriage at this point. Yeah. This, for me, is not an issue of sexuality. It's not an issue of people's private lives. This, for me, is an issue of the priorities of government. Yeah. And when the global economy is on its knees, this should not be at the top of the agenda. And I, if anybody that is gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender feels offended by that, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. I don't have any issue with you or how you live your lives, but this is not the top priority for a head of state at this point in time. I mean, if I was really going to put the cat amongst the pigeons, and again, I would underline what Mike has just said, what people do with their own lives is their own business. However, there is an obvious program in this country at the moment to destabilise culture in this country. We've just talked about how the church is setting up a bank, which is going to be charging interest, which is actually, in my opinion, a violation to Leviticus in the Bible. And again, I'm not a Christian, right? But also, with homosexuality is also, again, this is not me, this is what the Bible says, and that is the culture that is Christianity, and it just seems to me that this is another subversion technique, and that's why it's being focused on in the media. Right, we want to focus on the Sun a little bit, because the Sun has decided to declare war on paedophile sex gangs. That's very nice of them. However, when you look at the photographs that they've decided to associate with this article, of course, it's all Asians. Now, I'm going to say that we have, on a daily basis, more and more evidence coming out from many, many areas, and Oxford is key to this as well, not just Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, but also other things that we are working on around the Oxford area, which absolutely demonstrates that the main focus of paedophile activity is white men in suits. It's not these guys who, thugs as they may well be, and they deserve to be going to prison if they've done what they've done, but the questions that continue to be asked but are never getting answered about how these guys got the children that they were using, about the people that owned the guest houses that they were using these children in, about the fact that many children are still out in the streets in Oxford and other areas, and they're still being taken out of care homes, and there's still no proper investigation, and yet the Sun wants to focus on these gangs who are really not, they're the thin end of the wedge here. They are not the source of the problem. They are a part of the problem, yep. I'll acknowledge, but they're not the source of the problem. And this particular article is about divide and conquer among cultures again. So let's son, please do a little bit better, and let's get some focus on who's actually behind this agenda and this practice in this country.
Yeah. There was an article that was run yesterday, and it was talking about a stabbing that happened in a foreign country with, I think it was 17 or so many youths from this country. And it's interesting that they focused on the ones that were of mixed race, and not white. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And to finish the news section of the program, I've got this little thing: the Open Government Partnership. Now, this is a global effort to make governments better. We all want more transparent, effective and accountable governments with institutions that empower citizens and are responsible to their aspirations, but this work is never easy. It takes political leadership, it takes technical knowledge, it takes sustained effort and investment, it takes collaboration between governments and civil society. So this is their annual summit, and they're calling for proposals, and basically they're saying in just over 3 months, around 1,000 reformers from government, civil society and private sector will gather in London for the annual summit. The programme will build on core elements of what the OGP is about. And the key phrase in this that I wanted to highlight was reinventing the relationship between the citizen and the state. Now, please explain to me, who decided that relationship had to be reinvented?
Good question.
Right, that's the first point. It then goes on to say, we want the OGP annual summit to bring together leaders, decision makers, thinkers and doers from across participating countries and abroad. And again, who decided who these leaders, decision makers, thinkers and doers are? And it seems to me that we're being the idea is being pushed in our faces constantly that we live in a democracy, that democracy is something that needs to be exported to all these other countries. But we have no democracy. We have our representative democracy, where we actually communicate with our representatives, if it ever really existed, has been replaced with this participatory democracy, which is not really the idea of a participatory democracy in theory is that everybody participates. But in fact, what we're finding is that only a few people get the opportunity to participate, and those few would be belonging to NGOs, to various groups, charities, and that's really what big society is about, and that's what we're talking about. So this Open Government Partnership, of course, another annual summit, which is really pushing the civil society, the big society agenda, and I think we need to keep an eye on this. So if anybody wants to do any research into the Open Government Partnership, who's behind it, where they're getting their funding, and what their agenda is, perhaps it's Agenda 21, I don't know. Let's do some research on this organisation. So we'll just show their website again. That's the Open Government Partnership. Okay, so we're going to finish the news at that point, and we'll take our usual break. We're going to have Ian Puddick, and Patrick is going to interview Ian Puddick for in a few minutes' time. So what we'll do is we'll put the Bradbury Pound advert up as usual as we rearrange the studio, and we'll see you back in a couple of minutes' time. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Hi, welcome back to the UK column. I'm co-host Patrick Henningsen, and I'm here with a very special guest, Mr. Ian Puddick. And Ian's got an incredible story. A lot of our viewers at the UK column are already familiar, I'm sure, with Ian's story. It's a saga that goes all the way back to 2009.
That's correct.
And this is an incredible story about corruption, about the miscarriage of justice, but it's also a story about the collusion between law enforcement, the judiciary, a major transnational corporation, and also the mainstream media. So, Ian, for those of you who are our viewers who aren't familiar with your story, can you tell us a little bit of an introduction about yourself first, and then about how this all started?
Okay. Well, I'm a Londoner. I'm a plumber. I run a plumbing company in central London. And like most guys, I like to think I'm a regular bloke in that sense. The story itself unravels in 2009, and I'll get the sort of salacious bit out of the way because it starts off with an affair. I think we discussed this before. Let's be frank, affairs happen and they always will, and that's the way of the world. But I found out that my partner at the time had been having an affair. And it's really what unravels next, and it's not the affair that's the issue. It's about, as you said, the state collusion by the police, big global private security companies, the highest levels of investment banking, and how these powers colluded together to work with the police, who wasted over £1.5 million using the Counter-Terrorism Directorate to literally try every aspect that they could to try and destroy my life. And they obviously did a very, very good job. They spent a lot of public money. Ultimately, when it went to court, we won. But the issue in the middle is about state police corruption and how these things can happen. And as a regular bloke, as a plumber, as I've always said, if this can happen to me, this really could happen to anybody.
So how did this all start? Just give us a little synopsis.
I found out in 2009 that my partner had been having an affair. In the first instance, trying to resolve the matter, the personal matter. I called the chap that was concerned. And as I said, I think we've mentioned this before, the other party to the affair, it's no more his fault than it was my partner's fault. Takes two to tango. But in the first instance, I called him and asked for my partner to be moved. She worked for him as his secretary. He was having none of that. He was the chief exec of a company called Guy Carpenter. They're the world's largest reinsurance company. Mm-hmm. They insure the insurers. Is probably the easiest way to put it, and it's the highest form of investment banking. Not being able to get my wife to be moved, I rang the chairman of the company, who was very, very nice, a chap called Nick Frankland, and again, explained the circumstances and just asked for my partner to be moved. From there, it all sort of goes downhill. He was very obliging and my partner was moved. The chap concerned then reported me to his local police station for harassment, for making those calls, and obviously I did make those calls. The local police, Sussex police, confirmed in writing that it was a civil matter and not a criminal matter, and also because of his position being the chief executive of a large global corporation, the sergeant put in his notes that he didn't believe that this chap would turn up in court if they did pursue it, because obviously he'd have a lot to lose. It then takes that's the nuts and bolts. That's the everyday story that could happen to anyone. What happens next beggars belief, because the chap concerned then goes to their sister company, a company within their group of companies called Kroll.
I'm familiar with Kroll.
Kroll.
It's a large international private investigation firm.
It's the largest on the planet.
Corporate intelligence and also some government intelligence and
Yeah.
activities outsourced to this company.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Very, very influential.
Very powerful company.
I mean, Private Eye magazine states that they work for MI6. So we're not talking about a local PI, little private investigation firm based on the high street in a back alley somewhere. This is a global corporation that works with governments. Their managing director, a chap called Benedict Hamilton, confirms in writing, and we get all of this information, by the way, so this isn't me conjecture, I think this happened, I think that happened. We actually get documents to back up everything we said, and I believe as we go through this, we'll be looking at some of the documents. The managing director of Kroll, having been told by Sussex police that it's a civil matter, he confirms to Guy Carpenter, the insurance company, that they have met with the heads of the specialist crime department at the City of London Police. And perhaps if we could look at the slide, which it's slide 31, Kroll significant assistance.
Just keep talking.
That slide's quite interesting in as much as they confirm here, as you can see, that it's ringed. They've met with Superintendent Steve Chandler, Detective Superintendent Jeff Davis, who've been told that it's a civil matter. However, they've promised, and this is public money, the use of significant resources and the use of counter-terrorism directorate to investigate me. So you've got civil, and we've got counter-terrorism. There's no medium ground here, and obviously vast quantities of public money, which we brought out in court, that was over £1 million.
So when the initial complaint was made to the local Sussex Police Department, the police said, "Hey, this isn't a criminal matter; it's a civil matter.
Absolutely.
It's just between you, the gentleman, and your
Sure.
partner."
Sure.
And at that point, you thought, "Well, I've done all I can do there,"
Yeah.
and you thought it was over.
Yeah.
And little did you know this was going on behind the scenes.
Actually, we had no idea what was going on between, what was happening in the background. So we've now got what's called, we didn't know at this time, we've now got the police operation against me, which is called Operation Bohan, and again, it's the slide 22 with the counter-terrorism director. So we've got the local constabulary not interested. We've now got the big guns on it, and over £1 million of counter-terrorism funds being wasted on investigating me.
So just for the viewers' simplicity, the gentleman who had an affair with your partner, who's somehow, him or his company, has gone and expanded this to a personal vendetta to destroy you.
Yes.
Using the full resources of the country's counterterrorism unit.
Absolutely.
And also the resources within other private investigative firms like Kroll.
Yes.
And also the City of London Police.
That's correct. In the interestingly, just after they brought this Operation Bohan, in the first instance, my partner was then interviewed by the City of London Counter-Terrorism Directorate. Why this is important? The police interviewed her at length for over an hour, and they alleged that she had conspired there was a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, and they put it to her that she had invented the affair to discredit this gentleman. Obviously, she confirmed that there had been an affair, as these things. And I hate to keep referring to the affair because the issue isn't about the affair.
But that's what kicked this whole
It is, yeah. I can't tell the story without saying this, I'm afraid. If I just said one day I woke up and I was raided by the terrorism police, for nothing, no one would believe me. What's interesting...
If it had been an affair with, if your partner had an affair with the head of the local dairy,
yeah,
it wouldn't have escalated this high.
No, I put that in one of my early videos. If my partner had an affair with the milkman and I called the dairy, would I be raided by the counter-terrorism? We all know the answer to that. What's interesting though is I then asked my partner to get the names of the officers that had interviewed her, to go into the reception and go through the visitors book to get the names, to send emails to her company confirming that there'd been this interview on the premises by City of London police detectives all over this alleged affair. Interestingly, throughout the affair, despite protesting and claiming and explaining to the officers that there had been an affair, the officers kept saying no, there hadn't been an affair. The other chap was denying it all, and there was this conspiracy going on. The $1 million question, even if there was no affair and she had made it up, I'd made it up because we're all bonkers, the relevant question is, why are the counter-terrorism directorate interviewing someone about an affair? That's a more relevant question, whether there was a stupid affair or not, if that makes sense. What she then did, she contacted City of London Police and asked them the names of the officers that had interviewed her, who had authorised the interview and on what grounds. City of London Police confirmed that no officers had attended the company and had interviewed her. So she had never been interviewed. So other than her testimony, which could or could not be true, either she made it up or it did or it happened, they confirmed that it hadn't happened. What we have to do now is, again, the Kroll emails that we received show, and the Kroll email, which is quite interesting, shows that they actually set up the interview. And what it actually names the officer that interviewed her and states that they contacted City of London Police and they asked for the police to interview her. So you've got the police with no records denying this happened. So the only way of independently verifying that this occurred would be to go to this American corporation who actually arranged and set it all up.
So this is a case of Kroll wagging the police department.
Completely. I mean, you've got there Dan Valler. Since then, obviously, Dan Valler's had amnesia. He has absolutely, he made no notes. He has no recollection of it.
Didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
Yeah.
She says it happened, and Kroll confirmed that they set it up and named the officer that came along, or one of the officers. It's just the nonsense.
Well, this is a big issue here, whereby we have a private security firm, intelligence firm, directing the police to take action against a citizen.
Absolutely.
That's quite extraordinary.
It's extraordinary, but this big, it's the world's largest reinsurance company. We've got a lot of money at stake and some big reputations.
Mike?
Yeah, sorry, can I just confirm that is a Kroll document?
That's a Kroll document, yeah. The top's been cut off, but we do have that. That's a Kroll, an internal Kroll email. Yes, and it's been used, all of the documents that we're going to look at today have been used in court as well.
Mm-hmm. So this is all part of the public record? Absolutely,
yeah, this is public record. This isn't something I've just created for this presentation. These are documents that were used in court.
So as this progressed, take us a little bit forward here.
Well, yeah.
What was the next?
The next stage. I mean, you've got to remember, this is all happening to me, and I don't know it's happening. If that makes sense, because I'm not aware of this.
This is
big
happening
machine
behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's this big machine behind the scenes that are trying to discredit me. My company. Well, I'll come to that in a moment. There's the Kroll. There's also the Kroll email from the managing director of Kroll, Benedict Hamilton, about the sterile phones. I think it's slide 32. And what the Kroll managing director did was got some pay-as-you-go phones and was sending me messages. And he contacted me and said that we have got deep pockets, and we're going to, and I wouldn't swear, obviously, we're going to, if I may say this, F you like you've never been F'd before. So there were threats coming from Kroll directly to me. And, again, we go back to the analogy, if this involved a milkman working for the local dairy, would these big guns, would these huge resources, would the counter-terrorism police be involved? And we haven't got to the heavy nitty-gritty stuff yet. This is just minor stuff. This is just them playing games with me.
So here we have the private intelligence investigation firm using untraceable phones.
Yep.
And Kroll has also been in the news, you're probably aware, for other phone-related activities.
Yes.
What do you know about that? And what's been in the public realm anyway?
Well, I understand this with the whole News International debacle with the hacking. That I understand that Kroll were alleged to have been involved in the hacking of phones, and I think just only very, very recently, when I say recently, in the last sort of week, there's been some big exclusives in the press where SOCA, the Serious Crimes Agency, are now saying that huge corporations, these big blue chip companies, have been paying these private security companies for 10 years to hack and to do all this stuff, but they never investigated any of them. They got the evidence but didn't prosecute. So they're largely unaccountable. When people are unaccountable, they basically misbehave because they can.
So now we're at the stage now where this is all built up behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And you've gone about your daily business. You're trying to put your marriage back together.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
Then just after the threat from Benedict Hamilton that they had deep pockets, just shortly after that, 6:30 in the morning. My home is raided by the Counter-Terrorism Directorate. My plumbing company offices are raided by the Counter-Terrorism Directorate. And the Economic Crimes Directorate, you can see, I believe it's slide 28, they raided my company accountants. Now, my company accountants have got nothing to do with this whatsoever. So they raid my company accountants. We've got the terrorism police searching my house. We've got the counter-terrorism police searching my plumbing company. They remove all the computers, laptops, a satellite, little TomTom satellite navigation system, a mobile phone, and a digital camera. And they take all of this and they send it off to the high-tech crimes laboratory for forensic analysis.
Hoping to find what?
It's a huge fishing trip.
Hoping to find what?
Hoping to find anything. It's a huge fishing trip. I mean, they probably thought company accountants, dodgy plumber, cash,
must
no
be an
VAT.
Al-Qaeda sleeper cell, right?
Whatever. You can only imagine what was going through their minds. But the idea was huge resources under the banner of terrorism, so they can literally do whatever they want, and they did.
Just for our viewers, can you just explain what the counterterrorism raid? What happened? Was it in the morning?
Happened at 6:30.
And how many officers were there? What were they dressed like?
Well, it happened at sort of 6:30 in the morning. I woke up. There was huge banging in the door downstairs. So I've gone down, opened the door, and they were just there. And to be honest with you, I was in such shock. And they literally just in the
full gear.
They were where I was standing at the front door. The guy to the right, I remember seeing him armed, and I then did after this I did a freedom of information request, and I asked who authorised the name of the officer, who authorised armed police, on what grounds. It was all declined because of it was operational stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The police officers were talking about helicopter support as well. Again, so I did a freedom of information request asking who requested a helicopter support and on what grounds, and who declined it because there wasn't a helicopter. Again, that came back as classified. It was an operational thing. So these massive resources over what can only be described as probably a daily occurrence. Obviously, these things go on every day, people having affairs. But in the grand scheme of things, a petty matter. No violence, no threats. I'm not a violent guy.
But you had been targeted.
I've absolutely been targeted.
Your name came up and you've been targeted. Most of the people, obviously, carrying out this operation just assumed, because their commander told you that you are a risk to national security, or you're an international drug trafficker.
Or both.
Or both. So tell us what effect did all this have on your life and your business? Obviously, you run a successful business. This is now your business is in dire straits. What happened?
Well, the net effect of all of this didn't actually have an effect on my business and cash flow until a later date, because obviously the cumulative effect of all of this doesn't appear till later. What happened next was I'm obviously interviewed when they arrest me on this big huge raid. I'm arrested. Obviously, I've never been arrested before. I declined the solicitor. They offered me a solicitor. I declined one because I didn't need anybody to tell me what I can and can't say. Because I didn't think I'd done anything wrong.
You thought you were in the right. This must be a big mistake.
Yeah, I'd explained it to the officers. It was very simple. When the officers took me away that morning to the station, during the car journey, I told them everything that happened, told the truth, as you would expect. During the interview, they just put the tapes on and said, look, you told us in the car what happened. Could you tell us again? Yeah, no problem at all. So I repeated the story. It's now on tape. And they then kept me in the cells till sort of later that night. I'm then released, and this is when it starts to get very, very dark. I'm released on bail. I then have to attend another police station. Remember, this is City of London Police. This is not the Metropolitan Police. This is the city. They then take me to another police station, Snow Hill, a month later, and in custody, I'm brutalised. The two police officers take me through to a small room. And when I say brutalised, I mean they didn't punch me or hit me, but they're shouting abuse, they're calling me effing this, that and the other, and other words which I wouldn't even dare mention. And basically they turn around and say, while the forensics team have searched everything, they've found a photograph of me taking Class A drugs. So I turn around and say, firstly, I've never seen Class A drugs other than on TV, and I demand to see this picture. So he's shouting and swearing in my face and calling me all sorts of names. And I just say, and I asked for a solicitor and I was declined one. And I said, he said he didn't have the picture. I said, well, I'll wait. So he said, well, I don't have it with me. I said, well, I'll wait. You know, I want to see this picture. And if this picture exists, it has to be photoshopped or created, because it can't exist, because I've never done anything like that in my life. So after a load of verbal nonsense from this officer, Sergeant John Ellis from the Counter-Terrorism Directorate, he admits that this picture doesn't exist. But what they found, he describes a picture that they did see on my computer, and what it was, and it's farcical, and you could not make this up. They found a PowerPoint presentation on my computer called A Life of Riley, and it was my best man speech. And what I did was, rather than stand up and do the traditional best man speech and give the groom a tough time, I took my laptop to the wedding, a little projector, and did A Life of Riley for my friend Andrew Riley, and I superimposed pictures of him going through his life. And one of them was him as an international drug dealer. That's the last thing is, and it got a laugh. Yeah. And I explained to the officers, that picture, which is, by the way, it's not even me, it's Andrew Riley that's in the picture, and you can see his head clearly superimposed. I said, that picture was shown at a wedding, a public place, to a large audience, young and old, purely for a laugh, to get a laugh, to mock him. That wasn't to espouse being an international drug dealer, and I'm not in the picture. And then it was left at that.
Listening to this story, one can't help but marvel at to know that the sort of top echelon of our police forces will be this misguided, show this much abuse of power, taking personal details out of context, psychological bullying in order to break you for something that you didn't do, essentially.
Well, they've now got this situation. You've now got this situation. I mean, if there's the picture of my car from satellite, where they were using satellite technology to track my car. So we've got this massive counter-terrorist operation against me, and nothing.
We'll take a look at that in a minute, so people can see. Tell us what we're looking at.
Yeah, that's a picture of my Range Rover, and that's taken using satellite technology. And that was disclosed by the CPS. That was obviously the police were doing that. There's other pictures of my car when they were following me on different times and different roads and things. The point is, we've now got this massive counter-terrorist operation, huge resources, and nothing.
What does it cost to commandeer a satellite?
It's big money.
It's big money.
Yeah. It's big money.
So this goes into the pot of the sort of £1 million plus budget, which was allocated to harass you, to track you, to try to incriminate you for something, all for what looks to be a personal vendetta.
It's completely a personal vendetta. You know, I repeat it because it's quite funny, but it's also very true. If it was a milkman, we would be having this conversation.
And also the police, I think it's appropriate to mention now that they attempted to frame you for trafficking narcotics.
Yeah, class. I'll come to that. I'll come to that in a few moments. They've got nothing. So what they've got now is they've got me in this interview room. There's no recording of it. They've roughed me up verbally by calling me all of these names. They've tried to intimidate me into admitting that there's this picture of me taking drugs, which they then admitted at the end. And the final thing that Sergeant Ellis said to me was, "Did you ever take drugs when you were at university?" It's the last thing he said to me. And I said, I never went to university. I've been to a university, obviously, but I didn't study at university. And it was literally just scraping the barrel for anything. But I could also see how under that pressure, when someone is screaming and shouting at you and you just want to go, you just don't want to be there, and there's nothing you can do. They can lock you up. They've got these powers. They can do anything they want. It would be easy to say, yes, I did this, or I did it when I was 18, or I did this once, or I did that once, and cough to anything under that pressure. It was horrendous. I was very, very upset. Very, very, very upset. But again, there's nothing you can do. Incidentally, when I reported that to the IPCC afterwards, the CCTV in the station, for them taking... Firstly, the IPCC had trouble because the two officers that took me into that room, when they were investigated, they didn't deny it. They said they couldn't remember.
Deniability.
Just couldn't remember. couldn't remember, had amnesia. So I asked the police officer to look at the cameras, and I made a note when I came out of that room and went through where the cameras were. The IPCC then checked the cameras. Sadly, they'd been wiped. So there was no. So we've now got officers that aren't saying yes, aren't saying no, that have amnesia. The cameras are wiped, and then.
So there's no. So this is extraordinary. So you've been taken in, you've been questioned,
unlawfully
interrogated, let's say, and there's no record of you being in the police station.
Well, this is it. A friendly police officer said to me. Said to me, check the door locks, because when they've got like credit card swipe cards, when they take you through the police station, they swipe the doors. And he said that the data on those door locks is not kept at the police station because otherwise they tamper with it. It's kept externally so that it can't be tampered with by the police. So I, as a plumber, go back to the IPCC, to the senior investigator, and I say, could you check the door locks, please? Because they will confirm when I entered the police station, where I went through to this room. There will be a delay while I was interviewed in the room, and obviously the door locks will be accessed again when I come out. As a plumber, I shouldn't have to say that to a senior investigator, but I did.
Especially from the IPCC. And for those of you who don't know who the IPCC is, it's the Independent Police Complaints Commission. So here you are on.
They cover everything.
You're on your back heels. The IPCC is meant to watch the police in order to help regulate their conduct and make sure that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And if the IPCC isn't doing its job, then the question is, who is watching the watchers?
The answer is no one. I recently gave evidence to the Select Committee at Parliament that's been investigating this, and the IPCC is totally discredited. Totally discredited. I mean, it's people that are killed in custody.
Well, it's an embattled agency for many reasons, many stories, and yours is just one of many.
Just one of many.
And it's really shocking. But what's more shocking is what comes after this.
Well, I'm now charged with Section 2 Nonviolent Harassment, which is the lowest harassment you can get. It's specifically without violence. So you've had these huge resources chucked at me. And then obviously I'm charged with making these phone calls, which I've made. So there's no dispute about that. This is going to court, and it transpires that this chap had been using his company expenses to fund the affair. Now, I'm sure that he's not going to be the first, he's not going to be the last to do that, but it's about integrity, and it's about if you're a business leader in a financial market that's regulated by SOX law in the States, by the SEC, and the FSA in the UK, you expect a level of transparency and, more important, integrity. And obviously, in this case, it wasn't there. So what happens is, obviously, the company now are going to be in the spotlight with this trial, because their chief exec has been fiddling his expenses to hotels and all this kind of thing, and restaurants and all that other kind of thing, and putting down clients' names when obviously he was entertaining my partner. So that's going to be very embarrassing for the company. So they do an internal investigation. And the disciplinary investigation starts after the internal investigation by the lawyers to see if there was enough grounds for a disciplinary. And this guy resigns from the board. He resigns after 34 years as an employee of this company, gets a golden handshake, and off he goes to work for another reinsurance company. He then says to the City of London Police, "I want to drop this case," and the case against me is dropped. So I'm a free man.
So you should be a free man at that point.
I should be a free man at that point. But I was so angry with what the police did to me. As I said, people have affairs. It's just the way it's always going to happen, and it's not against the law. So this isn't about that.
So before this happened, Ian, you were a member of the public who believed
I've never voted.
Maybe you've never voted.
Which everyone tells me off for.
You're not the only one.
No.
But you believed in the system. You believed in law enforcement.
Yeah.
You believed that when you made that call that the police were really there to serve and protect.
Yeah.
And then this happens to you. And then obviously this personal vendetta, this gentleman drops the case against you. You think that you're going to be moving on with your life.
Yeah.
But you're also, really disappointed in something that you've believed in your whole life.
Yeah, I was furious. I mean, what spurred me to do what I did next, which is my website, what spurred me, really simply, and the judge asked me this at my trial, was when those two officers took me through to that room and brutalised me verbally, and then there was no accountability whatsoever, CCTV wiped, amnesia, all of the rest of it. When they did that to me, I thought they could do that to absolutely anyone. You read stories and you hear people. Yeah. And I just thought, if they could do that to me, I'm not going to let them get away with that.
And so you started this website. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah.
And then tell us what happened in the aftermath of this website.
This is where the whole thing just goes nuts, really. I bought the domain name ianpuddick.com, which is my name. Would members of the public and the press be interested in looking at a domain name called ianpuddick.com? Probably not. Why would they? So I bought the name, the additional domain name, policeexpenses.co.uk, and I went about and I created the website, which tells the whole story in detail about what the police did, the collusion between Kroll and City of London Police. There were many, many more emails. So what?
We've got a picture of you campaigning here. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, that's one of my pictures. I was just so angry with the police. There's my website. So I would that's outside the IPCC. After the IPCC covered up my whole case, that's me standing outside their London head office with my website, with a microphone. Police corruption.
So you're very public here.
Yeah, very public.
You're not hiding behind your website.
No,
you're out in public. Your website's behind you.
Yeah. The other thing I did was I went. As I said, I've never voted. I've never done anything like this before. I went to Speaker's Corner. There's a picture of me at Speaker's Corner speaking to some delegates actually from the Chinese embassy, and I went there every Sunday for 14 months. And what I did was, I would literally stand there with banners, talking with banners all about the police, and I would hand out leaflets. And City of London Police would send undercover officers to Speaker's Corner to listen to me. I was then arrested for creating my website. And obviously, there's no dispute about my website. My website's called Ian Puddick. It was bought by me. It's registered to me. But the police suggested that my website was unlawfully registered, unlawfully hosted. It was deceitful. But, I bought it. I bought it on my credit cards, registered to my address. It's called Ian Puddick. I'm Ian Puddick. But they just tried everything they could to twist what I'd done and to criminalise my website.
So just so that people understand here, what we're looking at is this. You've been, a victim of the system. You've been a victim of abuse of power.
Massive abuse of power.
Collusion between, high-flying corporations and private investigating firms and the counterterrorism police unit. And the mainstream media, the press, no one picked up the story.
I went to all the press. In the early stages. They showed some interest, but because it hadn't gone to court, I explained that at trial we had some journalists that were involved in giving affidavits to say that they were interested in an early stage and they'd made some exploratory calls to try and find out what was happening.
But this is as good of a story as any
you think so?
Any journalist would want to get their hooks in. So you're left now with sort of naked out in public. You have no choice. And the only options left really in that
is to do what I did.
Is to go to Speaker's Corner, is to start a website, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. If there's no more legal recourses, no media help, no support, that's all you've got left.
No, that's correct. I mean, the slide that's up there at the moment is a 20-foot banner, and I was trying to publicise my case. So those banners magically appeared on virtually every road bridge on the M25. And at hotspots on the North Circular Road, so anyone that's in London knows that that's a hotspot and there's roadworks and it's a nightmare and avoid it like the plague. But those 20-foot banners, again, trying to publicise this abuse of power by the police and this private security company, appeared absolutely everywhere.
And you got a lot of attention from your your publicity campaign here, your one-man PR campaign. Your website started. More people started reading it.
Absolutely.
More people became aware.
Absolutely.
Did you get a lot of support from the public?
Masses at Speaker's Corner. People would just. I think what was really funny was, I tell my story and I condense it and I'd say it starts with an affair, and then people would say to me, you must have done something really bad. You must have done something really bad. And I used to say to them, if I'd done something really bad, I'd stay at home, duck, say nothing, and try and get it over with. I wouldn't be saying, my name's Ian Puddick, this is what happened. Because whatever's happened, it's going to come out. It's going to come out in court, that's for sure. It's not going to. The police aren't going to forget if I'd done something bad to bring it up in court. They're going to give me everything they possibly can. And I used to say to people, because the public just would say, and I sadly include myself in this, I used to say to the people at Speaker's Corner, if you were standing there and I was listening to you, would I believe you verbatim? The answer is no, because I couldn't comprehend that this could happen. So therefore, the presumption of guilt in some form is there. But, I'm here because I haven't done anything, and they've done all of this. And there's me, I was camping outside Parliament Square with all the peace activists and anti-war demonstrators, and there's my tent. The police cited this as a huge hate campaign. So what I did was I opened a Twitter account and I would tweet out, almost every day, just links to my website. I made a little video of me standing outside the Houses of Parliament, telling my story. At the end, I make a joke of it because I've said it several times. At the end, I turn around and say to my wife, my partner had had an affair with the milkman. Would this have happened? We all know, and I just close it there. We all know the answer. It's a massive abuse of power, and a complete lack of accountability. And it's the lack of accountability that is the issue, because that's what allows these abuses of power, because they know they can get away with it.
Well, you can, of course, speculate all day about why this was escalated in the way that it was, and we don't want to get into speculations of maybe what was going behind the scenes at that particular City of London corporation and so forth. But what we can talk about in reality is that it did escalate, and this is what happened to you.
It did. I mean, there's a picture of one of my banners on Colonel Gaddafi's London house, where, as I said, I run a plumbing company. We actually did work for him. He still actually owes us money. He's probably not going to pay us.
Good luck.
There is an invoice probably sitting in the embassy still there, but that's quite funny. That was just purely publicity, just trying to get the mainstream media, trying to get some what they call traction with the story. We did all sorts of things like that, but it kept hitting dead ends. There's an interesting email, which I believe is 34, which shows that my phones were being tracked by Kroll, not by the police. That's an internal email from the managing director of Kroll, Benedict Hamilton, and you can see there that they're showing that they're trying to track my phone using the local cell transmitters in the area closest to my offices. So again, big resources. You've got police resources, you've got the resources of Kroll. Kroll, incidentally, had their own operation against me called Operation Martin.
Which is perfectly legal, right? So your private firm
do whatever they want.
Tapping your phones, hacking your phones, the exact same thing that spurred off the whole hacked off campaign and the Leveson inquiry.
My case was before the whole hacking saga. My case occurred before that. So obviously no one had heard of hacking. I'm sure the journalists in the background knew that it was coming. But other than that, no one. Well, we certainly didn't. We didn't know about it.
So what happened next? Now we're into a whole new realm.
Yeah, we're into a whole new realm. I'm now charged with creating my website, which obviously I've created. There's no dispute about that. It's all about police corruption, lack of accountability, and the collusion with Kroll, the security giant. So the police have criminalised my website. They actually briefed the press. It appeared online with Courtroom News that my website was a hate website, akin to an anti-Islamic or an anti-Semitic or whatever. They try to categorise it as a hate website.
So mischaracterization.
Completely.
And that's not the end of the mischaracterization. You've also been accused of tweeting things that you didn't tweet.
Completely.
And that was parroted throughout the mainstream media. That's when the media did get interested, was when they wanted to kind of looks to me like spread disinformation about your case.
There was massive. The whole case was completely misreported. As we got closer to trial, all our work as a business is with the public, so you can't target our customers because obviously it's Joe Public. When the phone rings, we don't know who's going to be at the end. We don't have any contracts. So what happened? All our suppliers were targeted and were told that my company was in big financial trouble. They're all called anonymously and told that Leakbusters Plumbing is in big financial trouble. It's about to go bust. Now, we had suppliers ringing up panicking because obviously we owed them large sums of money. And to be fair, they all took me at face value. I just said, look, it's completely untrue. My accountant sent everybody a letter saying there's this vicious rumour. It's completely untrue. If anyone wants to come in and view my accounts, just off the record, not pre-arranged, and see them however they are, they could do that. And not one of my suppliers did. But there was clearly a intention there to try and discredit and disrupt my business. My business was at this point beginning to suffer because I was so angry with what the police did. As you've seen from the pictures, I was out protesting, I was going on marches, I was standing outside the police station. Okay, at the weekend I'd be going to Hyde Park. My life became obsessed with exposing this police corruption. And with them, it's like a cat and mouse. I'd go out and stand outside the police station, they would arrest me. It was just cat and mouse. And the business started to fail. And in a 12-month period, I did have a successful business. My accounts were for that year, the previous year we turned over as a small company 1.7 million. We made a net profit before tax of £280,000, which is a phenomenal amount on a small turnover. And then 12 months later, my business is turning over 700,000, £1 million. We lost £1 million in that 12-month period of turnover, yet my costs were the same. Because I didn't really want to make people redundant and start sacking people, because it's not their fault that I've got all this nonsense with the police.
So you tried to hang in there.
Tried to hang in there, and what I'd done was, where we made that huge profit, rather than go out and spend it on flash cars and I live in a flat, rather than go and buy a house and do all the things that you do when you just get a big chunk of money, I kept it in there because I didn't know what was happening. And fortunately, as the sales began to drop, I had this cash reserve, but it just kept getting eaten into until we virtually ran out of money. We nearly went bankrupt.
So the bottom line is you made a conscious choice either to just forget about what happened here, but really you couldn't because you're being pursued, and to stand up, stand your ground, and fight and campaign, not just for yourself, but clearly you're really campaigning on behalf of other people.
Well, people think you're nuts.
And a lot of, and I'm sure how many people contacted you with similar stories. Once you became public, people will come to you like a magnet with telling things that no one would believe, like your story.
Even now,
no one would believe your story if you weren't so vocal in making sure that story got out.
No, that's true. That's true. And even today, I still get emails on a regular basis from people. There's been abuses of power, and they just haven't maybe had the resources or the time, the energy, or the nous, or whatever you call it, to just get up and fight back. That's the big problem. But my accountant, and again, this is a matter of record. We gave this to. This was used in court. My accountant was called anonymously, and what was a shame was it was a fairly new accountant. He's still my accountant, but we'd only recently changed. So my accountant, I didn't have a long-standing relationship with. He'd been my accountant for about 18 months, so not long. So he didn't know me. I don't really have lots of dialogue with him. And he was called anonymously one night and told, "Do you deal with Leakbusters? Do you know Ian Puddick? Did you know he's a convicted drug dealer?" So there's that theme again of drugs coming through. Yeah. Obviously, none of that's true. I've never been charged, arrested, involved, investigated in any of these kind of things. It's just purely a malicious thing that's been made up to discredit me. But it's the old adage, if you throw enough mud, it will stick. People say, no smoke without fire, he must have been doing something.
So what happened here is, you were targeted, they thought you were going to crumble at the beginning, and your adversaries, as they were, are doubling down on their bets constantly. Well, we haven't got him here, let's go after him here, and pretty soon we get all the way down the line, and we have, you've got an image here of, to tell us what this is.
Can I come to that in a few moments?
Yeah.
Because I'll just explain a bit of background before we get to that, which will probably explain it and make it clearer what actually occurred. I'm now charged with Section 2 Nonviolent Harassment for creating a harassing website. The charge against me is that my website, which I placed online, harassed this other gentleman that my wife had the affair with out of a job. He had to resign from his job because my website was so harassing, he'd resigned.
That's what they say.
That's what they said.
But what really happened?
Well, what really happened was, if you want to show the Herbert Smith email, which is very telling. What happened was, my website didn't harass him out of a job. He'd resigned because he'd been investigated over his expenses because of the affair internally. The chap stood up in court and under oath said that he'd never been investigated. Again, it was made up by me, and my website harassed him out of a job. We were able to produce this letter from Herbert Smith, one of the world's largest corporate law firms. My barrister got a witness order on the chairman of the company to come to court so that he could be cross-examined to prove that my website didn't harass him out of a job, but he'd resigned because of the expenses. They couldn't have the chairman in court over all this nonsense under any circumstances.
Bad PR.
Massive bad PR.
Yeah.
So a compromise was reached that the chairman of Guy Carpenter, the reinsurance company, wouldn't come to court if they confirmed that everything that I'd said was true and that he had been investigated for his expenses, and he left while he was being at the start of the disciplinary hearing against him, and that was used in court.
So he's saying that everything Ian says is true.
Completely.
And not only that, you actually launched your website after this gentleman resigned, right?
Well,
is that correct?
Yeah. Even if we didn't have that evidence, the only way they could convict me is if they had a TARDIS, because as the letter confirms, the chap in question resigned in February 2010. My website went live 2 months later in May 2010. So there's no way that my website could have harassed him 2 months earlier when it didn't exist.
Yeah.
So you couldn't. But to be fair, again, if you think about this logically, how the heck did they get that through the CPS? The CPS said there was evidence that it did.
I mean, that beggars belief that the Crown Prosecution would take on a charge like that without actually looking at the facts.
Absolutely.
But that are underpinning that charge is pretty shocking. And as you know, when the Crown Prosecution has a lot of weight behind it. When they step forward, with a charge, it's people assume that there's some substance behind it, right? But in this case, there was nothing.
No. Coming to the picture of the bug that was planted in my home. Just before my trial, my home or my flat is broken into, and they steal all of my court defence documents. They actually lifted my iPad off the box with all my court defence documents and just picked up the box and left the iPad. Who broke in? Obviously, we don't know. The Met Police came and did 2 investigations. They confirmed via their forensics team that it was a professional burglary. They'd never seen anything like it in North London in 20 years. Who breaks in and steals court defence documents?
During a trial?
Just before the trial.
Just before the trial.
So
it's something out of a Hollywood legal thriller.
Yeah, we found this very I don't know about these things, but I do know now that it's been called a very, very crude, old-fashioned bug or listening device. And we believe that was planted for me to find, 2 to freak me out, 3 to send a very powerful message: you're not safe in your own home.
Yeah.
Someone could come into your house and do whatever they want, plant bugs with impunity. The police aren't going to fully investigate it. The police weren't particularly interested.
And also to make you think that you found the bug.
Yeah.
When it's probably not the bug.
Well, there is that. We did have the house swept. And it did show up that there was something else hidden. To be honest with you, I just left it. If it's there hidden, so be it. I mean, it's my home. I don't really care.
You just assumed after a while that they're listening to your phone calls.
I assumed that a long time before that. On the advice of a friendly police officer who was very kind and helped, who was appalled at all of this. I think the other intention of placing that bug was they were hoping that I would start tweeting about this other gentleman saying, you know, I believe he's done this and he's done that. As I said in court, I don't believe he's got anything to do with any of this. This was Guy Carpenter, the reinsurance company, the world's largest, turning around to the private security company saying, all of this is going to come out in court. What's our exposure? How's that going to affect us?
They're doubling down on a mistake they made early on. And it escalates.
Damage limitation. What's going to
lie upon lie upon lie.
Completely.
Yeah.
So they wanted to know what we were going to say in court. So they broke in. They stole all our court defence documents. So they knew what we were going to say. Well, not what we were going to say, but what we were going to rely upon, what evidence we had. And it must have been very damning for them because obviously we had compelling evidence of this collusion between Kroll and City of London police. I managed. I found Michael Wollkind, QC. I believe there's a picture of Michael. He's Britain's top defence. Criminal defence QC. I mean, he absolutely tore strips off the police officers. He just absolutely took strips off them in court. The police, in the first instance, brought in the CEO of monsterdomains.com, a guy called Matt Mansell.
As an expert witness.
As an expert witness. Yes. And he came in and he provided a very, very detailed account of my website. And he gave evidence. And if you'd listened to him for sort of, you know, for his summary in court, you would have definitely felt that I was up to no good, I was up to something. You know, even if you didn't understand all the technicalities. He gave, to be fair, he never said I did anything wrong, but he gave a very clear impression that I was up to no good. The
way he framed his expert testimony was such that it
gave the perception.
It would shed doubt upon your credibility.
Completely. We got Ron Cuffley, who's ex-police and military intelligence. I always refer to him as the spook, which he doesn't like. And he did a very simple but detailed report. And when Michael Wollkind got to cross-examine monsterdomains.com, Matt Mansell, he literally said, "Have you read our expert report?" And he said, no one's shown it to me. So the judge adjourned for half an hour. He just read through it. And my barrister turned around and said, "I've got two questions for you. One, have you read and understood the contents?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Does anything that you've said in your report apply directly or indirectly to Mr. Puddick's website? Yes or no?" He said, "No." So that was a whole morning just wasted.
A total irrelevant expert testimony.
Completely. He said no. There was no debate. There was no arguing over facts. He just said no. The police officer in charge of the trial, in her opening salvo, said that Mr. Puddick had put thousands of messages on Twitter, on Facebook, on the internet, had sent emails. I'd also sent an email to the whole of the reinsurance market, all about Mr. Haynes, this chap. She went into detail about the effect that had caused the family, the length of time, the number of tweets, the period of the tweeting. And she went into detail about all of this stuff. And it gave the illusion or the perception that I'd definitely done it. If you read that, you would assume that, one, she was talking from fact and that I'd done these things. My barrister then asked her to produce an example, just one, not one of thousands, just one. And they couldn't. He then asked her if she personally, as the officer in charge of this, had ever seen any of these tweets, Facebook entries, all about this other chap. And she said no. He then said, "Has anyone in the investigating team seen any of this? Yes or no?" And she said no. And she said, "But we believe it's Mr. Puddick's intention to do this," which is very, very different to doing it.
So first they came out and said, you've tweeted, you've slandered this gentleman thousands of times, by Twitter, by this, by that. And then
he was forced to resign because of my website. She went on and on about that.
Then you've asked them for an example, and then they've backpedaled
completely.
And they
didn't say, "Oh, here's one or two, here's five."
So they're saying, "We didn't say he did it. We're saying that he might do it in the future."
She said we believe it's his intention to.
A considerable climb down.
She said there were over 10,000 emails sent to the whole of the insurance market. She was asked to produce an example of the email. She couldn't do that. He then said, "But as the officer in charge, and you've just stated that this email went out, have you actually seen a copy of this email? Yes or no?" She said no. Has any of the investigating I'm not making this up.
So they ginned up a whole plot.
Massive.
And what the worst part about this ginning up of the plot is that the media, mainly the BBC in this case, got a hold of the ginned up plot and publicized it.
Completely.
So they've taken a false accusation and then gone national with it.
Well,
what happened then?
Well, on the day that I was acquitted, I'm literally standing on the gates of the court. I've just come out to a whole media scrum, and the BBC at that point are doing a live piece to camera. John Brain does a 2-minute broadcast on BBC News saying Ian Puddick set up a fake website, put thousands of tweets and Facebook and blah, 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 all about this chap, and the poor chap had to resign as a result of all of my behaviour. However, the judge found me not guilty because what I said was true. Now, technically, there are aspects of that that are true, i.e. the judge found me not guilty because what I said was true. However, just because something's true doesn't give you the right to say it, we all know. I wrote to all of the media that were there, copied the BBC's narrative, and it made headlines.
They just parroted what was on the BBC, and the ripple effect begins.
Completely.
Right.
I then complained to the BBC and asked them, again, could you show me a copy of one tweet or something like that, because they reported it as fact. And also the fact that this gentleman was forced to resign because of my website, they reported that as fact. And it's just nonsense. So the BBC came back and said they've looked at their coverage of my story in line with the other media, and what they found is that their coverage was in line with the other media. So they weren't sure what I was complaining about.
It's extraordinary that the BBC, with all their budgets and reporters and researchers, couldn't actually log on to the internet, get onto Twitter, and just do a basic search and find one of these thousands of tweets. But they didn't bother to do that.
No, they didn't bother to do that at all.
They didn't bother to do that. That's a shame.
The assumption is that it happened. I did it, but I got off maybe on a technicality or because the judge thought what I said was true. But the assumption is that I behaved in that way, which is
shocking.
It's completely not true. Nor did anyone else on my behalf, by the way. It just didn't happen. It just never happened. They don't exist, any of these tweets. On the last day of my trial, I spent the whole day giving evidence and telling this whole story in absolute detail about the whole of the police operation against me. I told the court about the 2 officers taking me through to that room, what they did to me in that room, that the whole process and the lack of accountability and how they could get away with it. And I explained that it was that one aspect that inspired me to create my website. The judge was appalled. The judge adjourned the case for an hour, and she said, I want those 2 officers here in an hour. The 2 officers turn up. The first officer, Colin Dawson, Detective Constable Colin Dawson from the Counter-Terrorism Directorate, he stood up. My barrister's firing questions at him about the interview. Again, he has amnesia. He has no record of going in that room with me at all, doesn't remember anything. The second officer, the Detective Sergeant John Ellis, again from the Counter-Terrorism Directorate, who's the big tough guy who shouts and screams and is very, very threatening because he can. He turns around and says, yeah, I remember that interview very, very well. It was very, very important, in fact. So my barrister said, what was so important about it? He said, well, when I was searching Mr. Puddick's home, I found large quantities of Class A drugs throughout the house. My barrister looks around at me, I'm behind bars, just gobsmacked. He just invented this. And he's lying on oath.
So now you're a crack dealer.
A crack cocaine dealer. I just couldn't believe it. So
amazing.
So my barrister turns around to him, and my barrister was brilliant. My barrister said, could you describe the search procedure? He went into absolute detail about how they searched the property. And my barrister then turned around and said, where did you find this? He said, I found them in the kitchen, I found them in the bedroom, I found them in the loft room. This is Class A crack cocaine, and all the paraphernalia. He also described a Damien Hirst art piece that I owned, and he described that as part of his evidence giving. What's interesting is when he was in my home with his search team, I didn't own it. I didn't have it. I hadn't bought it. I bought it 6 months later. But the Damien Hirst art piece was in my house when the burglars broke in to
steal
steal my court defence documents.
Right. So that was
So either they briefed him, he was involved. You can say whatever you want, but there's just no game. Again, it's like the TARDIS. How could he know that something was in my house that wasn't there? Hadn't even purchased it.
So in a bid to frame you up for possession of Class A drugs, they made a mistake.
Made lots of mistakes.
And exposed themselves.
They made lots of mistakes because they were lying. And obviously when you tell a lie, you've got to tell 4 other lies to cover the other lie. And if you keep pushing hard, and he was now in the witness box and feeling very, very uneasy. So my barrister turned around and said, so when you found the Class A drugs in these 3 places, obviously you confiscated them. And he said, no, I forgot. And my barrister said, well, you made a note in your notebook, didn't you? You made a notebook. No, I forgot. So he said, but you discussed it with the other officers. No, I forgot. And then my barrister picks up his phone in court and says, but you made this call. Gov, we found a large cache of crack cocaine. You made that call, didn't you? Because obviously you want a promotion. And he said, no, I didn't tell anyone. Just made it up. And again, gets away with it. Now, if I did that in court, I wouldn't be here today talking to you. I'd be behind bars. And again, it's that lack of accountability that's gone all the way throughout my trial, and many, many others, I have to say, that is the main issue. That's the main problem.
So, how did the story end?
Well,
it hasn't ended, but tell us what happened after that.
Well, after that, obviously I've been acquitted. The story goes out. The media completely ignore all of the facts in the case and just report the lies that the police told as fact. So everything the police have said has been reported as fact, but I got off on a technicality, and that was my fortune, or whatever you want to call it. But the real story about Operation Bohan, all of the documents we've disclosed, and many, many more, were completely ignored by the media. My MP did debate the case in Parliament, so it has been debated.
Do you have any images of that?
Yeah, I don't think we've got any images here.
So this was raised as a question?
Yes, it was raised as a question.
By your MP?
Yeah.
That's good. That's great that he did take that case up.
I was also invited earlier in the year to, I met with Keith Vaz, who is the chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, that's looking at policing now, because obviously every day this story is coming out about all of this lack of accountability, police misconduct, Hillsborough, Daniel Morgan, the Lynette White case in Wales, where it's just, there's so much going on. And what happens is when the police are allowed to resign, on full pensions, rather than face criminal charges, and that's the top, and it's the people at the top that set the culture of the organisation, and then obviously that trickles down. So that's where the accountability or the blame really lies in all of these things.
So is there a chance through all your pain and suffering and having to endure all this, is there a chance at the end that you could help to reform some problems? Is that one of your objectives, to help fix what's broken?
Well, what I'm trying to, with my business is on life support, thanks to HSBC Bank, who've been brilliant through this. I think I mentioned that to you. They've been fantastic.
They've been supportive.
Very unbelievably supportive.
That's great.
Absolutely unbelievably supportive, which I know is very difficult because you don't hear about banks doing that very often. So I'm quite happy to say they've been brilliant. But this changed my life forever, because I was just so shocked that the police could do this. I've just made it an important part of my life to make sure, not just to keep going on about what I've done, but I help other people. I speak at public rallies. I do presentations on my experience, just to alert people that people are here. And I get invited by people. I'll get asked by people that are fighting the police, where there's been other miscarriages of justice, what they can do. And obviously, we have very powerful tools. We have the internet, we have Twitter, we have Facebook and various blogging, and use them wisely.
So this is the advice that you give, because there's probably a lot of people out there, they're not in exactly the same situation as you, but have similar things that they're battling against. And is there any recourse, or is there any refuge if you are a victim of this type of corruption or collusion between entities towards the individual? What would you advise? What direction would you point people in? What have you learned?
Well, it's really difficult, because the people that you need to go to in this are the police, and if you can't trust the police to tell the truth, you're stuffed. Are all police corrupt? Are all the police bad? Of course not. That'd be a crazy thing to say. But there is a culture within the police forces, and obviously the cultures vary throughout the country, but there is a culture of this lack of accountability where, you know, there's a code of silence. In February, I attended a select committee hearing. I was invited to Parliament. And as a perfect example, Bernard Hogan-Howe, who is the Commissioner for the Metropolitan Police, he stood up and he gave his little presentation. He said, look, the Met Police are the most accountable police force on the planet. He said, we're held to account by the public, we're held to account by the press, we're held to account by the Independent Police Complaints Commission, we're held together by to account by our professional standards. So we're transparent and we deal with issues, and we'd like to reinforce that to the public. I thought, well, I didn't deal with the Met, mine was City of London, but I know lots of people have had huge problems with the Metropolitan Police, major problems. And he came out with all this nonsense, and therein lies the problem, that the head's in the sand and there's issues, but he gives the illusion or the perception that all is good. 10 minutes or 15 minutes after he gave that presentation to the Select Committee, a professor stood up who's been doing a study of the police for the last 12 or 2 years, and she gave all the statistics to show that police officers, if they see other police officers carrying out, whether it be a crime or misconduct or whatever, well, again, there's a code of silence. You know, you have to look after your fellow, you know, officers. And there again, it's that culture. And if the police can't be expected to uphold the law, who can? Who can? Because the IPCC don't do it.
And this is a big issue of debate right now.
Massive.
Because, you know, whistleblowers. In effect, you're kind of a whistleblower of sorts, although you're not coming out from within an organization.
No.
You are blowing the whistle on some kind of state corruption or abuse of power.
Yeah.
And right now, the government, through the Leveson inquiry and other things in this country, is saying, whistleblowers, we want you to go to the police first. Don't go to the press. It's the right thing to do is to go to the police. But what happens when the police are part of the problem?
Yeah.
What can you do if you're a whistleblower then? And this has been borne out in a number of other issues, including the child abuse issue to some degree as well. So that is an important part. And you've taken the tools that you had with you, the internet, which is still free to some extent, and also just your ability to go out in public and to physically, face-to-face, tell your case to the public.
Yeah.
Those are some of the last things that we have left, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've used those.
Yeah. I mean, people will categorise you as a nutter, but as long as what you're saying in a reasonably articulate or intelligent way, and it's true, and you know, it's very easy to go on and on and on and get bogged down in the detail. I say to people, if you've got a story, just condense it into 2 or 3 little bullet points and just concentrate on those. If someone's got some questions, you can fill in the blanks. But you don't say, he said this and she said that and they came along and he did this and they went there. I mean, we've had quite a bit of time, so I've tried to give a flavour of everything that's gone on. There's lots more things that happened, but these are some of the key points, again, that highlight a massive abuse by the state, really.
If the police had done their job in the early days of this affair, we wouldn't be sitting here today, would we?
No, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
And you'd just be running your business and getting on with your life. But it did happen.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here today. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us before? Or anything that you're doing right now? What are you working on right now? And what would you like to let the people know about?
We're working on a prosecution of the police officers involved, a private prosecution of the police officers. The police again, close ranks, the lawyers for the police now saying that there were significant threats of violence, that I'd been violent. So we got Class A drugs, violence. I mean, during the case there was no violence, and specifically Sergeant John Ellis, who's the officer that brutalised me, when he was interviewed by my barrister, he was asked, were there any violence? Yes. Was there any threats of violence throughout this, or evidence of threats of violence throughout this? Yes or no? And he said no. But they're now saying there was violence in court. And that was the one time they could have said, yeah, there was violence. Mr. Puddick did A, B, C, and D, or bring it out, or alleged to have done that. But they didn't do that because there weren't any. But now, after the case, they try and close ranks. I did an interview after the trial with BBC Radio 5, and the interviewer said to me, "We've spoken to City of London Police, and they've confirmed that no counter-terrorism directorate officers were ever involved in your case. So, I was able to show live in the studio. Fortunately, I had one of the business cards, and I handed it over. They had business cards to the counter-terrorism director, and I said, "Well, that's what it says on their business card." And every single officer in my case, when they gave evidence, they gave their name, they gave their rank, and they said they were counter-terrorism. So either the business card's a lie, when they gave evidence it was a lie, but still after that, the police brief against you. They brief against you because they're embarrassed. Is that what we want from our police?
Well,
is that what it's about?
It's just a question of just doubling down on bad bets. We see that a lot, in our institutions and our government. Clearly, this is an abuse of power. Clearly, your story demonstrates that there are people and organizations, whether they be in the corporate world within the City of London, or whether they be in the police force, or whether they be in the private security intelligence industry, that believe that they are above the law. And if there's no one to hold them to account, then they are above the law.
They are.
They are above the law. And if the IPCC can't hold the police to account, we have a major problem there. And the whole result of this, Ian, and I'm sure you agree with me, is that this is a system, and I have to hammer this point home again. This is a system that you really believed in
completely.
Your whole life. Now,
without question,
when we have abuse of power, when people are above the law, when organizations are above the law, those governing are governing by consent of the people, and the public confidence is lost. This is a very slippery slope, in my opinion. And if they had done their job at the beginning, you wouldn't need to campaign.
No.
And they wouldn't need to double down on their bad moves and keep lying and so forth. So I think it's important that our viewers at the UK column understand that Ian's story could happen to anyone. And so Ian Puddick's story is your story. And I'd like to thank you very much, Ian.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about my experience.
For all your time and your efforts, and I'm sure that your efforts are just beginning. I think you're a great beacon for other people who are victims of this situation in the future, and you're going to help a lot of people in the future. This will make a good book one day. Thank you very much, Ian.
My pleasure. Thank you.